3 rings of moon pool out past the lichened pine. 2 loons call each other from their loneliness. A stage set of clouds, their backs to the footlights, echo the silhouettes of wooded points and porcupine islands. Dark water, clouds, and trees holding the deep night stillness. A poem from Santa Fe, New Mexico, Apodaca Hill. I follow the dancing ball moon over the rolling waves of red earth, listening to the chorus of crickets, coyotes, and stars, savoring as they sing the scents of pinon and cedar, of sweet juniper cracking in the fire where we sit together in big sky silence, sharing the company of clouds, long, luminous, and still, contemplating us, contemplating them. Welcome to the latest floating poetry broadcast, and thank you for leaning in to the 81st show in my ongoing weekly series, coming to you live from the calling and responding sea and coast from Shelter Harbor, Rhode Island. This is your poet and poetorialist Colin Goedecke, a voice for living our days more poetically, more expressively, more soulfully. Last week, we explored re-seeing and reimagining the world, the inner world of self, the outer world of daily life, culture, and nature. The possibilities when you try, choose, experience other ways of seeing, perceiving, when you imagine living more vibrantly and with others in a freshly reinvented way and society. This week, we're attending to listening more finely and hearing more greatly to yourself, your inner voice, others, to the world's clear to subtle sounds, songs, messages, and its silences. Nature's, not least. And the many gifts that flow from these finer receivings, attunings that we can all come to, which are at once an art, a practice, and a passion, as well as a place of so much possibility. So, let's give ourselves over for a while to some of these ways and places. This is from intelligentchange.com. In everyday communication, we usually use the terms, quote, hearing and, quote, listening interchangeably. While there are some similarities between the two terms, there are also some very important differences. Hearing is the psychophysiological process of detecting vibrations, sound waves, through the ear that convert into what we perceive as sound. Hearing is something that is ever present, regardless of whether we're focused on those sensations or not. Listening is a two-way interaction that requires us to connect with a speaker, focus on their words, pay mindful attention to what they say, and put that information in a context and give it meaning. Whenever we listen to someone with the intention to understand and contribute to the communication, it's called active listening. And here's this from Psychology Today, David Ludden, PhD. Hearing with our eyes, seeing with our ears, how the brain combines sights and sounds to create conscious experience. This was interesting. We don't experience our senses individually. Rather, our brain meshes with our vision and hearing to create our conscious experience of the world. What you see can influence what you hear, and likewise hearing can affect vision. Although speech is perceived through the ears, what we see can change what we hear. In a YouTube video, a man produces the same syllable over and over again. If you watch his mouth, you'll hear the syllable fa. But if you look away, you'll hear ba. Although your ears hear ba, your eyes see fa. And even in speech, your brain trusts vision over hearing. This phenomenon is known as the McGurk effect. Interesting. Well, here's Walt Whitman's Song of Myself, section 26. Well, He was an Olympic listener and hearer, as you may well know, as I know. Song of Myself. Now I will do nothing but listen, to accrue what I hear into this song, to let sounds contribute toward it. I hear bravuras of birds, bustle of growing wheat, gossips of flames, clack of sticks cooking my meals. I hear the sound I love, the sound of the human voice. I hear all sounds running together, combined, fused or following. Sounds of the city and sounds out of the city, sounds of the day and night, talkative young ones to those that like them, the loud laugh of work people at their meals, the angry bass of disjointed friendship, the faint tones of the sick, the judge with hands tight to the desk, his pallid lips pronouncing a death sentence, the heave-ye-oh of stevedores unloading ships by the wharves, the refrain of the anchor lifters, the ring of alarm bells, the cry of fire, the whir of swift streaking engines and hose carts with premonitory tinkles and colored lights, the steam whistle, the solid roll of the train of approaching cars, the slow march played at the head of the association marching two and two. I hear the violoncello, 'tis the young man's heart's complaint. I hear the keyed cornet, it glides quickly in through my ears, it shakes mad-sweet pangs through my belly and breast. I hear the chorus, it is a grand opera, and this indeed is music, this suits me. A tenor large and fresh as the creation fills me, the orbic flex of his mouth is pouring and filling me full. I hear the trained soprano. The orchestra whirls me wider than Uranus flies. It wrenches such ardors from me I did not know I possessed them. It sails me. I dab with bare feet. They are licked by the indolent waves. I am cut by bitter and angry hail. I lose my breath. Steeped amid honeyed morphine, my windpipe throttled in fakes of death, at length led up again to feel the puzzle of puzzles, and that we call being. Thank you, Walt Whitman. Here's Helen Mort, M-O-R-T, a new poet to me that has this piece. Push the button, hear the sound. Listen to the Laura Keats whistling song. Can you hear the call of the mynah bird? Can you hear the flamingos in the water? Can you hear your small heart next to mine and the house breathing as it holds us? Can you hear the chainsaw start? The bones of our neighbor's eucalyptus breaking? It's summer, high, emptied. Listen to the ground, giddy with thirst. Listen to the dogs dropping on the lawns, the murderous water boatmen skimming the green pond. Can you hear the roses rioting on the trellis? Can you make a noise like a cheeky monkey? There are sounds your book lacks names for. Can you hear the sleepless girls in Attercliffe? Can you hear the aspirin of the sun dissolving? Listen to the casual racists in the family pub. Listen to the house Shiraz I drink as if it's something's blood. Listen to my fear blooming in the vase of my chest, and listen to how I water it. Can you hear your grandfather's lost childhood? Can you hear the suburban library shutting, the door closing, the books still breathing? Oh, can you hear the budget tightening? It's almost dark. Listen to the noisy penguins on the ice. Listen to my late-night online purchases, orange lipstick, high-waisted bikini briefs. Types of plants that will never die. Listen to your half-sister hissing to her friends at 2 a.m. You hang up. No, you hang up. Listen to the panic in their emojis. Can you hear your father lighting his first cigarette? Can you hear the foxes mating all the way to oblivion? Their sounds are inhuman, too human, scaling the high fences, pressing our window panes. Listen to the utter indifference of the stars. The night is full of holes, and we grate our bodies against them. Can you hear that, Alfie? Can you hear me holding you closer than my life? Listen to The Trout by Schubert. Listen to the blackbird's chirpy song. Listen to this waltz by Paganini. Listen to the stage as we walk clean off the front of it into the audience, the pit, the silent orchestra. Push the button, hear the sound. Helen Mort. Thank you, Helen. The English writer Ian McEwan tells us this in a nutshell. We live in a new era, mostly of self-expression, but not so much of listening. We are not Hamlet so much these days. We are broadcasters of the self, Selfhood is extremely important, of course. Who can deny it? But when you make the self the outer limit of your politics, you then begin to ignore a great deal of the attitudes, situations, dilemmas, misery of others. So there should be a limit, I think, on the limiting factor of selfhood. Listening, that is, abandoning the self and abandoning yourself to another's point of view, is what the internet has not really given us. It's given us trolls. It's given us tsunamis of opinion. Perhaps it'll take a bend in the future that we can't yet foresee. Thank you, Ian McEwen. And what do you think? How closely are you really listening? Maybe even including here right now. Abraham Maslow's definition of, quote, real listening, to listen, quote, without presupposing, classifying, improving, controverting, evaluating, approving, or disapproving, without dueling what is being said, without rehearsing the rebuttal in advance, without free associating to portions of what is being said so that succeeding portions are not heard at all. And the French writer André Gide, everything that needs to be said has already been said, but since no one was listening, everything must be said again. But that, a very lovely friend of mine lent me this book, had mentioned it. It's by journalist Kate Murphy. You're Not Listening is the title, What You're Missing and Why It Matters. And I looked through quite a bit of it, but I thought this was, these were especially apropos excerpts, just 2 paragraphs. None of us are good listeners all the time. It's human nature to get distracted by what's going on in your own head. Listening takes effort. Like reading, you might choose to go over some things carefully while skimming others, depending on the situation. But the ability to listen carefully, like the ability to read carefully, degrades if you don't do it often enough. If you start listening to everyone as you would scan headlines on a celebrity gossip website, you won't discover the poetry and wisdom that is within people. And you withhold the gift that the people who love you, or could love you, most desire. But that, and this other piece toward the end of the book, our modern selves talk more and listen less, despite the fact that understanding and responsiveness to one another's stories, ideas, and concerns have defined all our achievements, from hunting woolly mammoths to putting a man on the moon. Not listening to one another diminishes what we can achieve, and in that way, too, can be seen as a moral failing. We not only fail one another as individuals, we also fail to thrive as a society. So that's Kate Murphy. You're Not Listening is the title of her book. That's the only book I'm holding in my hand, because if I had to hold all of these books, there'd be quite a stack. Well, years back, I had a series. I can't remember how many there were, maybe at least a dozen, maybe 24, of conversations with interesting thinkers, interesting to me, and it was called Ideas from the Front Lines. I think it's still all floating around out there. And this was on the art of listening, as it happens. It was a conversation about listening vitally with Jane Hewson, Hewson. Here are a few excerpts. Me, what's the real art of listening, and why do we need to be practicing it right now? Jane, listening is about being still and patient and generous. It's a difficult trifecta to achieve. Think about the last time almost anyone you know gave their absolute attention to you or someone who was talking to them. You have to quiet your mind entirely and be willing to be influenced by someone else's thinking and thoughts. As individuals, we rarely discuss how to listen nor learn how to listen, unless you're a musician or a journalist, and I'm not sure even journalists learn how to listen anymore. Me, what happens when we listen vitally? Jane, in the purest sense, when we really listen, we're recreated and grow by taking in something new. When we become receivers of ideas like great radio receivers and attend to the thoughts and views of others without transmitting our own, so listening can become an extraordinarily creative process. Think about a river at its source. Along the way, thousands of brooks and streams and other bodies of water join it, all adding to the flow and the whole. So by the time the river reaches its mouth, it is swelled with all these contributions. Think of your mind and heart growing in this same expansive way as your life progresses, as it freely receives a wealth of other contributions. We have an opportunity to live and work this way, but we can't do it without making listening vitally a priority. Sorry, and then flipped over the other way. How has technology affected our ability to listen? Jane, the act of listening itself is a factor of your age and exposure to technology. Those who grew up with computers often thrive on mental multitasking, listening to music, for example, while chatting online, while talking on a cell phone, while watching a sporting event on TV. They listen differently and more chaotically than their parents, than someone like me. Today, the art of listening has been overwhelmed by the ceaseless input of, quote, noise in our daily lives, which gives rise to our need to be heard clearly, a need that rarely gets met. There's so much coming in that isn't filtered, can't easily be filtered, so you wind up drowning in this unfiltered kind of listening. There is an antidote: tuning into the healthy, the wanted, and the needed. When was the last time you sat in a place where there was absolutely no man-made sound? Where it was completely quiet? Even in the wilds of Vermont, where I live, there's interference. But when the power goes out there, I can sit in the kitchen next to the wood stove at night with a candle and hear a lone drop of water outside. I can hear the creak and groan of the old sugar maple in a slight wind and listen to the hisses in the fireplace. There's no extraneous input to contend with. All this pure expression is always there for us to listen to, but we have to work harder these days to be in these moments. Well, thank you again, Jane Houston, for that years earlier, and I'm rippling it out to the ether and the universe and to her, wherever she may be up in Vermont right now. I'll have to let her know I shared this. Here's a poem from one spring in Cobble Hill, Brooklyn, where I was a poet in residence in 2017, among other times. A yellow beam. The first thing I see when I open my eyes in your broad flowering bed. A ship's horn floating in all clear from the harbor. The first note I hear as I open my ears from night and deep sleep. Then bright quavers of birdsong from the gardens greening below your windows. Soft, warm skin. The first thing I feel as my body unfolds into a fresh, flowing first morning. Yellow beam. There's another poet, Robert Francis, I've newly come across, and his poem, The Sound I Listened For. What I remember is the ebb and flow of sound that summer morning as the mower came and went and came again, crescendo and diminuendo. And always when the sound was loudest, how it ceased a moment while he backed the horses for the turn, the rapid clatter giving place to the slow click and the mower's voice. That was the sound I listened for. The voice did what the horses did. It shared the action as sympathetic magic does, or incantation. The voice hauled and the horses hauled. The strength of one was in the other, and in the strength was impatience. Over and over as the mower made his rounds, I heard his voice, and only once or twice he backed and turned and went ahead and spoke no word at all. Thank you, Robert Francis. Well, Galway Cannell talks in this poem of being well attuned as a parent to a child. It's called After Making Love, We Hear Footsteps. For I can snore like a bullhorn, or play loud music, or sit up talking with any reasonably sober Irishman, and Fergus will only sink deeper in his dreamless sleep, which goes by all in one flash. But let there be that heavy breathing, or a stifled come cry anywhere in the house, and he will wrench himself awake and make for it on the run, as now we lie together after making love, quiet, touching along the length of our bodies, familiar touch of the long married, and he appears. In his baseball pajamas, it happens, the neck opening so small he has to screw them on, and flops down between us and hugs us and snuggles himself to sleep, his face gleaming with satisfaction at being this very child. In the half-darkness, we look at each other and smile and touch arms across this little, startlingly muscled body, this one whom habit of memory propels to the ground of his making, sleeper only the mortal sounds can sing awake, this blessing love gives again into our arms. Thank you, Galway Canal, for that beautiful poem. On a Mother's Day back in 2020, I composed this. Actually, I think it was the first poem I ever composed on and for a Mother's Day. The mother tongue. The one we heard, learned in utero. From the first one that used it to speak to us, shape vowels for us, tell stories that glowed, sang lullabies that soothed. As we tuned our ears, began to tune ourself, our near-born, newborn self, new-made senses to the world around us, and fountain forth words of wonder, of sorrow, of tenderness, and gladness alike, in the shared language of our shared nature, our dear mother tongue. Emily Buchwald, came across her as also a fresh, and this piece apropos of how children listen in. So we have the parents, now we have the children. My mother's music. In the evenings of my childhood, when I went to bed, music washed into the cove of my room, my door open to a slice of light. I felt a melancholy I couldn't have named, a longing for what I couldn't yet have said or understood, but still knew was longing, knew was sadness untouched by time. Sometimes the music was a rippling stream of clear water rushing over a bed of river stones caught in sunlight. And many nights I crept from bed to watch her swaying where she sat, overtaken by the tide, her arms rowing the music out of the piano. Thank you, Emily Buchwald, My Mother's Music. And Liesel Müller gives us, from a different breed of listener, what the dog perhaps hears. If an inaudible whistle blown between our lips can send him home to us, then silence is perhaps the sound of spiders breathing and roots mining the earth. It may be asparagus heaving head first into the light and the long brown sound of cracked cups when it happens. We would like to ask the dog if there is a continuous whir because the child in the house keeps growing, if the snake really stretches full length without a click and the sun breaks through clouds without a decibel of effort, whether in autumn, when the trees dry up their wells, there isn't a shudder too high for us to hear. What is it like up there above the shut-off level of our simple ears? For us, there was no birth cry. The newborn bird is suddenly here, the egg broke and the nest alive, and we heard nothing when the world changed. Thank you, Lisa Muller. One spring, in Berlin, I sat in a drawing room alone with a beautiful old instrument, and as I was musing on it, just observing it, came forth this poem, The Silver-Eared Sousaphone. It sits stoutly, surely, so quietly now, listening with one immense ear that drinks in the loudest to the faintest sounds, the clatter of cutlery, conversation, the clink of glasses, thunder, rain, rustling leaves, which travel nautilously down its diminishing silver tube tarnished by time, weather, and generations of musicians' blowing lips, pressing fingers, that made this great ear a once great mouth, maybe sousaphoning rousing marches up north, or somber to spry funerals down south, masked Venetian carnivals, gypsy dances in wild, firelit forests. The silver-eared sousaphone. Well, expanding on our theme is what happens between each other, back and forth between us as we communicate, as we speak one to the other. And I came across, I thought he'd have something good to say, Alain de Botton from the School of Life in the UK. Good listeners are no less rare or important than good communicators. Here, too, an unusual degree of confidence is the key, a capacity not to be thrown off course by or buckle under the weight of information that may deeply challenge certain settled assumptions. Good listeners are unfussy about the chaos which others may for a time create in their minds. They've been there before and know that everything can eventually be set back in its place. Thank you, Alain de Botton, for that. And David Bohm's, B-O-H-M, from his book On Dialogue. In a dialogue, nobody is trying to win. Everybody wins if anybody wins. There is a different sort of spirit to it than discussion. In a dialogue, there's no attempt to gain points or to make your particular view prevail. Rather, whenever any mistake is discovered on the part of anybody, everybody gains. It's a situation called win-win, whereas the other game is win-lose. If I win, you lose. But a dialogue is something more of a common participation in which we are not playing a game against each other, but with each other. In a dialogue, everybody wins. Thank you for David Bohm. Well, there's so many ways to converse, literally and figuratively, and opportunities to do so with yourself. There's a poem around that idea from mine. Day 1. Have a conversation with the morning light that enters and graces your room, with the silence you slept and dreamt into, with the earth passing deeply under your feet, with the open sky or any clouds floating about, with the young and old trees stretching their limbs, with the birds, whether quiet or singing their songs, with the stars, maybe a moon after the sun has slipped away, with the soul always there by your side, attending. You may use words. They're not absolutely necessary. Day 2. Repeat day 1. I was thinking of what guidance, wise guidance was out there for those interested in the philosopher Erich Fromm, F-R-O-M-M. Wonderful, wonderful. So much wisdom of so many kinds. And he argued that listening is, quote, an art like the understanding of poetry. Drawing on his half-century practice as a therapist, he has 6 guidelines for mastering the art of unselfish understanding. Unselfish understanding. Let me give those to you. 1, the basic rule for practicing this art is the complete concentration of the listener. 2, nothing of importance must be on his mind. He must be optimally free from anxiety as well as from greed. 3, he must possess a freely working imagination sufficiently concrete to be expressed in words. 4, endowed with the capacity for empathy with another person and strong enough to feel the experience of the other as if it were their own. 5, the condition for such empathy is a crucial facet of the capacity for love. To understand another means to love him, not in the erotic sense, but in the sense of reaching out to him and of overcoming the fear of losing oneself. And last, understanding and loving are inseparable. If they are separate, it's a cerebral process, and the door to essential understanding remains closed. Thank you, Erich Fromm. And of course, for as many of you would know, I think he's up in his 90s or late 80s, the Vietnamese Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh, on how real communication is vital between 2 very close people. He said the intention of deep listening and loving speech is to restore communication, because once communication is restored, everything is possible, including peace and reconciliation. Thank you. He has so many good things out in the world to read that I'm sure you could find online or any of his books. They're all wise and worthwhile. That brought to mind this poem of mine, written back in Brooklyn in 2016, The Harpsichordist, and how when we speak, when we sing, when we express with heart what happens, what can happen. The harpsichordist plucks only the most delicate, eloquent inner strings, which vibrate through all nearby, earby chambers, plays continuo as feelings collate, orchestrate, intimate through opening, listening bodies. Dana Joy's poem, Marriage of Many Years. Most of what happens happens beyond words. The lexicon of lip and fingertip defies translation into common speech. I recognize the musk of your dark hair. It always thrills me, though I can't describe it. My finger on your thigh does not touch skin. It touches your skin, warming to my touch. You are a language I have learnt by heart. This intimate patois will vanish with us. It's only native speakers. Does it matter? Our tribal chants, our dances round the fire, performed the sorcery we most required. They bound us in a spell time we could not break. Let the young vaunt their ecstasy. We keep our tribe of two in sovereign secrecy. What must be lost was never lost on us. Thank you, Dana Joya. And here's Stephen Sturgeon's poem, also newly discovered poet. Quite a handful of them this week, I'm happy to say, to find and to introduce. Music between strangers. A sycamore grove, and in its limbs the orchestra played Ma Vlast. So I saw boughs bouncing and tuxedo legs swinging, sap spotted above the splayed blades of the ground feathered black and moss in the sweat of the set sun, and the players' faces were where moths roosted, where leaf points drew water stripes on brows and eyelids. Their hands that stirred in pollen like a fog were masked by bird's nest and boughs and flaking vines. That you were last to climb down, trumpet tied to your back with blue twine, is the only thing I believe in, and after you landed, drifting through a stream, in a mat of orange needles, you whistled to what light could float through the leaves, screen, and canopy, diffused like tracing tissue, a scrum of Ben-Day dots, and not much at that, now that more than the concert is ended, my musician. Thank you, Stephen Surgeon. And what about that music that happens with and between and among lovers? Here's body music. Its preludes and overtures, fermatas and cesuras, its crescendos, glissandos, and diminuendos, its flutes and strings, vibratos, tremolos, of lovers, each both tuning and conducting, concertizing, improvising, making a music only they can hear, playing deep inside their joining, orchestrating, resonating bodies. Think, if you will, on your own of now or later of life experiences, especially in nature, where your listening and hearing senses were very heightened, wildly attuned to nature, to another, or both. Here's Evergreen. This was written up in on Lower Osable Lake in the High Peaks region of the Adirondacks, back in Keene Valley years ago. Evergreen. The lake is all ours, all reflected stillness to canoe through, to dip our wooden brushes into, through wavering Miro-like shade shapes of silver, dark purple, mirror black, to drift through moments near hieroglyphic rock faces, mythic limbs of fallen trees forming sinuous submersive sculptures, to float back and forth between each other. Two natives paddling silverly into the wilderness, into the harmony. Two explorers threading an alpine fjord. Two romantics, one serenading, the other echoing. Two lovers poising to join warm lines, limbs, lips on a soft bed of evergreen. I also found in the Marginalian, which used to be Brain Pickings, now is called that, I sourced How to Listen Between the Lines. This is Anna Devere Smith on the art of listening in a culture of speaking. Well, if you know about her, she's more than an artist, actor, playwright, educator. She's also the founder and director of Harvard's Institute on the Arts and Civic Dialogue. Half a century after John Cage demonstrated that we only hear what we listen for, she set out to explore her intuition that in order to develop a voice, one has to, quote, develop an ear, that words can be as much, quote, the most important doorway into the soul of a person as, quote, the doorway into the soul of a culture. She spent 25 years traveling and interviewing, at first anyone who would talk to her, from the YMCA lifeguard to the lady at the clothing store registered to a convicted murderer in a women's prison, and eventually public figures like Christopher Hitchens and Studs Terkel, all the way up to then-President Bill Clinton. She would use these interviews later to, quote, perform the person in her acclaimed one-woman plays. This is from her book, Talk to Me, Listening Between the Lines. Who's listening anymore? What does it take to get people to listen? When do people feel they need to listen? When do they feel they have to listen? We get so used to hearing things that they have no meaning. We live with the expectation that words mean very little because we have seen it all before, heard it all before. And that is why I find myself going on a quest down memory lane for a time when words meant something in my family, in my church, in my city, in my world. Thank you, Anna DeVere Smith. If you don't know about her in that book, or just about her, you might want to visit something to do with her. Langston Hughes, the Negro speaks of rivers. I've known rivers. I've known rivers ancient as the world and older than the flow of human blood in human veins. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. I bathed in the Euphrates when dawns were young. I built my hut near the Congo and it lulled me to sleep. I looked upon the Nile and raised the pyramids above it. I heard the singing of the Mississippi when Abe Lincoln went down to New Orleans, and I've seen its muddy bosom turn all golden in the sunset. I've known rivers, ancient, dusky rivers. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. Thank you, Langston Hughes, for that. Richard Loren is a dear Italian friend up in Midcoast, Maine, and I wrote this for him, and the reason I'm even going to read a couple of things here of this kind is that think how you might describe the patois of someone you know well, literally and metaphorically. So here's a few of them, of mine. He speaks Piemontese. This caro signore speaks Fiat, top down, through the crayon-colored back roads of his beloved countryside, speaks in tongues of food and wine, laughter, and la bellezza della vita, in the music and mystery of the spheres, ones far beyond earth, sings in keys of black and white, in tunes and tones mellow and heartful, reverent and thoughtful, uses a dialect all his own, and a free-form accent on living, greatly inviting, intriguing, to listening ears. And this was a poem from my older brother Christopher, The Humming Man. He hums often, alone and in company, during pauses in conversation, between bites of food, walking outside or inside between rooms, upstairs, maybe when bathing or shaving. It flows as naturally, it seems, as his breathing. The reason for it, unknown. Something to discover. I sense it makes him happy or keeps him company. I'm listening. And with an eye and an ear to making your own invocations to the earth, the land, the sea, the universe, whatever you wish to invoke toward or speak to in a larger way. Here's one of mine. This was from Hydroussa, which was the ancient name for the Cycladic island of Kea in Greece and the Aegean. Let the gods speak. Let the sea and wind god speak to me, sing to me of their storms and serenities. Let the dry earth yield up its new and ancient fruits and flowers, its hidden waters. Let the clear air carry my own voice into these hills, into these stones, into this sea. So, listeners, the importance of speaking forth from our deepest self, from our soul, and being heard, right, in a more profound way out in the world, beyond people, at least for me. All right, we'll continue. I don't know if you know about Gordon Hempton, but he's a fascinating fellow who wrote One Square Inch of Silence. It's a sanctuary of silence drawn from the Hoh rainforest of Olympic National Park in Washington. In it, he writes, silence is the presence of time undisturbed. It can be felt in the chest. It nurtures our nature. I bring him up because he has an incredible conversation with Krista Tippett of onbeing.org. Just marvelous, and I'm encouraging you to visit that if you haven't already. And maybe apropos is Mary Oliver's When I'm Among the Trees. When I am among the trees, especially the willows and the honey locust, equally the beech, the oaks and the pines, they give off such hints of gladness. I would almost say that they save me in daily. I'm so distant from the hope of myself in which I have goodness and discernment and never hurry through the world, but walk slowly and bow often. Around me the trees stir in their leaves and call out, "Stay a while." The light flows from their branches, and they call again. It's simple, they say, and you too have come into the world to do this, to go easy, to be filled with light, and to shine. Thank you, Mary Oliver. And this poem of mine from Pine Island Channel, Killarney, Northern Ontario, 1 August, some years back. It's, I would say when one has connected with nature, listened into nature, the natural world, speaking to us, to you, dear listener, what has happened there? How did you feel? This is the morning blue heron. Many herons have spoken to me many places and times, very interestingly, but this is one. A sun salutation from a great blue heron that almost silently alights in an outstretched hand of white pine and speaks in his native tongue, while around him, around me, listening, thrums a hummingbird, ripples the channel. Arrives the morning. Further is the poet Wendell Berry. We talked a little bit about silence, which is just as important as in Gordon Hempton, capturing that, also absence of man-made noise and static and chaotic sound. Berry talks about fertile solitude. We enter solitude in which also we lose loneliness. True solitude is found in the wild places where one is without human obligation. One's inner voices become audible. One feels the attraction of one's most intimate sources. In consequence, one responds more clearly to other lives. The more coherent one becomes within oneself as a creature, the more fully one enters into the communion of all creatures. Thank you, Wendell Berry. Let me share Pablo Neruda's poem, Keeping Quiet. Now we will count to 12 and we will all keep still. For once on the face of the earth, let's not speak in any language. Let's stop for 1 second and not move our arms so much. It would be an exotic moment without rush, without engines. We would all be together in a sudden strangeness. Fishermen in the cold sea would not harm whales, and the man gathering salt would look at his hurt hands. Those who prepare green wars, wars with gas, wars with fire, victories with no survivors, would put on clean clothes and walk about with their brothers in the shade, doing nothing. What I want should not be confused with total inactivity. Life is what it is about. I want no truck with death. If we were not so single-minded about keeping our lives moving, and for once could do nothing, perhaps a huge silence might interrupt the sadness of never understanding ourselves and of threatening ourselves with death. Perhaps the earth can teach us, as when everything seems dead and later proves to be alive. Now I'll count up to 12, and you keep quiet, and I will go. Thank you. Pablo Neruda. Here's a poem from North Truro, Massachusetts, up on the Cape Cod, one very early autumn. Casting stones. The feel of a sea-smooth stone on the fingertips, the diminutive spin of a sun-washed stone as it arcs up above the horizon, the water music of each stone as it strikes the surface, all burbled bass and timpani, the lively splash of a sky-tossed stone like a fish leaping under, the soft and perfectly circular ripple as it disappears, and the following grace note flowing with silence. Let's ponder this through this poem. And what else is speaking to us beyond our fellow beings? The speaking world. The recitations of the ocean's breaking waves. The hymns rising from the green hearts of forests. The narrations of rivers, rhapsodies of valleys, prairies. The whispers passing between clouds and mountaintops. The soliloquies of the deserts, colloquies of blooming gardens. The paeans chorusing through the canopies of rampant jungles. The shared poetries of the moon, stars, and midnight wind. All the sensuously shaped and deeply throated voices of the speaking world that sing through the air, that seek out listening ears. So the speaking world, there's so many times of day, all times of day when you can tune into it, such as the morning. Here's a poem from New York City, March, one early spring, listening to the sunrise. The morning sun must be rising. Under the covers, eyes closed, I listen to the long and short-toned sounds of birds chiming like bedside clocks, rousing the world from its dreams. Consider all the many kinds of, quote, music you can hear, that you can tune into. This was driving through the countryside near Morristown, New Jersey, in June of 2017, in a rainstorm, listening for miles. Listening to Stella by Starlight, Stella by Rainlight. Driving down the highway, drops pattering, beating time on the windshield. Their own kind of music, their own blue notes, clear as water jazz notes. From his book, Music and Imagination, the composer, the famous American composer, Aaron Copland, the sensitive amateur, just because he lacks the prejudices and preconceptions of the professional musician, is sometimes a surer guide to the true quality of a piece of music. The ideal listener would combine the preparation of the trained professional with the innocence of the intuitive amateur. The ideal listener, above all else, possesses the ability to lend himself to the power of music. Without theories and without preconceived notions of what music ought to be, the gifted listener lends himself to as a sentient human being to the power of music. We all listen on an elementary plane of musical consciousness. On that level, whatever the music may be, we experience basic reactions such as tension and release, density and transparency, a smooth or angry surface, the music's swellings and subsidings, its pushings forward or hanging back, its length, its speed, its thunders and whisperings, and 1,000 other psychologically based reflections of our physical life, of movement and gesture, and our inner subconscious mental life. Thank you, Aaron Copland. I wanted to read you something from Helen Keller about hearing, quote, a symphony and how she experienced it. But we're going to have to come back to that because I realize we want to just edit down a bit more so we want to finish in good time with us today here. So D.H. Lawrence's poem Piano. Softly in the dusk, a woman is singing to me, taking me back down the vista of years till I see a child sitting under the piano in the boom of the tingling strings and pressing the small poised feet of a mother who smiles as she sings. In spite of myself, the insidious mastery of song betrays me back till the heart of me weeps to belong to the old Sunday evenings at home, with winter outside and hymns in the cozy parlor, the tinkling piano our guide. So now it is vain for the singer to burst into clamor with the great black piano appassionato. The glamour of childish days is upon me. My manhood is cast down in the flood of remembrance. I weep like a child for the past. How about this poem for Nipper? Anybody remember the old RCA Victor talking machine terrier? He always caught my fancy even as a boy, ever since. His master's voice. He sits there forever, that milk-white dog, eternally attuned, cloth ear angled into the flowering vase of the now-forgotten gramophone, waits there in the center of a shining sea, a revolving dance floor with music-making bands, sits, listening, inside cranked-up contraptions with wide-open mouths that cry out everywhere, often in Italian, Caruso-like, ridi, pagliaccio, with the voice of more than one maestro. Harks to man-made machines that play to this permanently quiet and patient canine friend suspended in time and spun through eras and millions of crackling operas and arias, tin-plated symphonies, and now faded love songs, in all his pure and unwavering fidelity. Which makes me think of how faithfully we can listen, how beautifully when we choose to, when we feel compelled to. And listening to places that we travel through. They could be far away places or not far away. This is one that spoke to me. I listened to very carefully and beautifully in the way it came to me in Rome one September. Senti a Roma. Listen to Rome. Today a saxophone blows rouge over the cobblestones. Here the faded yellows of accordion, guitar, and hand-tinted songs spool across the piazza. There bells peal gold and umber onto the rooftops. Later, fluted silver tones blend with dancing green fountain song, aqua verde con verde, until sapphire falls quiet from the night sky. Senti aroma. Tonight, a small brass tingle of stars. I was thinking of the sound and signature of our voices, of your voice, my voice, your natural voice. It's like no other, like a fingerprint, no two alike, with its own music, its own vibrations, nuances, essences. Yes. Hoagy Carmichael said this about his own voice. He began to emerge as a solo singer-performer, first at parties and professionally, he described his unique, laconic voice as sounding, quote, the way a shaggy dog looks. I have Wabash fog and sycamore twigs in my throat. Yeah. Wondering how you would describe your voice or how someone would describe it in that way. You might appreciate knowing about Chloe Goodchild, a singing philosopher, vocalist, teacher, author, and founder of The Naked Voice. Her teachings focus on 3 sound keys: sound awareness, sound intelligence, and sound wisdom, leading to an understanding of your, quote, naked voice as a catalyst for authentic soul expression, creative action, and compassionate service. Well, I know of her firsthand through a remarkable and powerful workshop I did with her a few years back through the Shift network that she's involved with. Anyway, look her up, Chloe Goodchild. Okay. Gloria Steinem, on the road as a medium of listening in a culture deafened by speaking. One of the simplest paths to deep change, she said, is for the less powerful to speak as much as they listen, and for the more powerful to listen as much as they speak. She makes a beautiful case for the humanizing power of the itinerant life as a medium of listening in her book, Is My Life on the Road. As you know, she's as you may know, writer, activist, she was trailblazing feminist, and she reflected on a lifetime of travel as teaching her about human connection and how to amplify the voices of those muffled by our dominant culture. Taking to the road, by which I mean letting the road take you, changed who I thought I was. The road is messy in the way that real life is messy. It leads us out of denial and into reality, out of theory and into practice, out of caution and into action, out of statistics and into stories. In short, out of our heads and into our hearts. What we're told about this country is way too limited by generalities, sound bites, and even the supposedly enlightened idea that there are 2 sides to every question. In fact, many questions have 3 or 7 or a dozen sides. Sometimes I think the only real division into 2 is between people who divide everything into 2 and those who don't. So she says, spend some time on the road, in an on-the-road state of mind, not seeking out the familiar, but staying open to whatever comes along. It can begin the moment you leave your door. Ursula Le Guin. When you speak a word to a listener, the speaking is an act, and it is a mutual act. The listener's listening enables the speaker speaking. It's a shared event, intersubjective. The listener and speaker entrain with each other. The voice creates a sphere around it which includes all its hearers, an intimate sphere or area limited in both space and time. Creation is an act. Action takes energy. Sound is dynamic. Speech is dynamic. It is action. To act is to take power, to have power, to be powerful. Mutual communication between speakers and listeners is a powerful act. The power of each speaker is amplified, augmented by the entrainment of the listeners. The strength of a community is amplified, augmented by its mutual entrainment in speech. This is why utterance is magic. Words do have power. Names have power. Words are events. They do things, change things. They transform speaker and hearer, feed energy back and forth, feed understanding or emotion back and forth, and amplify it. Teller and listener each fulfills the other's expectations. The living tongue that tells the word, the living ear that hears it, bind and bond us in the communion we long for, in the silence of our inner solitude. My poem, as we come now to the last few, life can rhyme. The rhymes and rhythms of your life can syncopate, inner and outer, can sound clearer and fuller, can move you in marvelous, mysterious ways. Listen for them, feel them, then dance with them all, body and soul. And this, you're not a talking head. You're a talking heart, a talking soul, a talking body, who speaks with the energies and cosmologies of a whole being, who voices from a solar plexus place, who converses in a language felt more than heard, understood beyond mind, beyond words. Echo chambers, the places of living where your being resounds, where the voice of your heart and soul is amplified, where you, who truly are, reverberates fully in the mind's ears of others, brings you into a great cathedral of conversation with your world, with yourself. And last, for our time together, dear listeners, be still and listen to what the earth below your feet is singing, to the stories the young and old swaying trees are telling, to the conversations of the hawks and the herons, the whisperings of the planets and stars, the jubilations of the sun, the rain, the ocean waves. Be still and listen with your spirit's ear to everything of note that's here, all ready to be heard. Thank you again, one and all, for leaning in, floating in, feeling in, keening in from wherever you're listening in the world. Because every fully engaged listener is a gift, not just here, but everywhere. And I love hearing from you. If you're moved to send a note with a question or comment, Colin@thepoetorialist.com. This poetosphere is here to serve all. If you appreciated the show, want to give thanks with a donation or support my larger poetic arts, I'd surely welcome any contribution, which you can make by PayPal or Venmo, or directly through my site, thepoetorialist.com, or simply by mail to me at P.O. Box 1032, Westerly, Rhode Island, 02891. If you're a patron who'd like to explore hosting me for a time on part of your own or another property as a working poet in residence to bring forth a new body of poetic art there, and dedicated to you, and in return, please reach out to discuss the possibilities. I do regularly seek fellow artists to collaborate with on projects musical to theatrical. Meanwhile, you can hear all my broadcasts online, on YouTube as replays, and soon all past and new shows on many different platforms, from Spotify to Apple and Google. I hope you'll lean in again next week, or soon again. Till then, dear listeners, here's to listening well, with full engagement, hearing more completely, outerly and innerly, tuning your remarkable receiving abilities ever more finely, greatly, adventurously. Goodbye for now, and good spirits.